Good evening. My name is Dr. Dennis Reschke. This is the fourth session of a series on creation evolution. I'm using the book Fingerprint of God by Hugh Ross as a text, and I have been going over cosmology as a first part. The second part will cover theology, scriptures relating to the Bible, and the last part on biology. And we're just finishing now the cosmology section. We've covered the history of cosmology, starting with the Greeks, culminating, at least in our sense of how large the universe is, with Kant in the 1700s, and then whose idea was an infinite universe, and then going on to Einstein, who brought it back to what it is today, about a 17 billion light year diameter, and talked about some of quantum mechanical substitutes for the Big Bang Theory and how they fall short. And then finally I talked about the anthropic principle. This is a principle birthed in notion from non-theist cosmologists, significantly Carl Sagan et al., looking at the universe and noting that the various parameters that have to make it up seem to dictate for one to conclude that the universe is made for humans, anthropos. And what I'll be covering today now and finishing up are designs of our solar system and Earth which make an Earth-type planet almost impossible. In other words, it's a creative miracle that we have an Earth-type planet at all, and the probability of another one in the universe is unreasonable. I'll be going through some numbers that were actually presented to Congress several years ago when asked to finance the SETI project, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, and were turned down, and now it's completely privately funded. So I'm going to go now through 19 parameters found in our solar system, more or less. I was looking at the universe last time, but now I'm going to narrow it down just to our solar system and the Earth. And after I go through these in explanation, then I'm going to go back and look at the probabilities of each and come up with how probable it is to come up with an Earth. The first one is the number of star companions. It turns out that, okay, the sun is a star, our sun. So I use those terms interchangeably. There's, as I noted last time, on the order of a trillion suns or stars in the universe. And it turns out that half of them are binary. That is, there's two rotating around one another. Ours is called the bachelor star, so there's only one. The problem with a planet, and there are planets revolving around binary systems, the problem with that is it's very disruptive to the orbit. It makes the orbit very variable and not conducive to life. So the chances of finding life on any planet revolving around a binary system is not possible. But a star is necessary for heat for chemical reactions to occur. So that eliminates half the stars in the universe. But since there's a trillion, there's still a lot of stars that are eligible. All right, second one, parent star birth and and that's really related to parent star age. If you remember last time, I talked about 2 generations of supernova necessary for the heavier elements to occur, and that not only for a star like ours to occur or planets like ours to occur, none of that could have happened before 10 billion years after the singularity, the Big Bang event. But even given that 5 billion year parameter or time frame from the onset of those type stars to present, a more recent star, what happens is the star is unstable in its burning. So it takes at least 1 billion years for a stable burning star such as ours. And if you look too far in advance, our star will, for instance, turn into a red giant. It won't happen in our lifetime, so don't worry about it, but in about 9 billion years, 10 billion years, it will get so large that it will actually engulf our planet. So there's a just right period where an Earth-type planet would have to be revolve around a sun of a certain age. The next, number 4, apparent star distance from the galaxy center. There are actually 2 types of galaxies in the universe: elliptical and spiral. We happen to be in a spiral one, and the spiral one, you've probably seen pictures kind of like this sort of thing. And elliptical is kind of just amorphous ball. And it turns out that there is no star formation in elliptical galaxies. Elliptical galaxies. So that eliminates half the galaxies in the universe. You need star formation for a planet formation, because it's understood that when our solar system came into being, it was a conglomeration of matter, mostly hydrogen, and the gravity was such that the heat generated was able to ignite the hydrogen, and that turned into the sun. But spinning off from that were heavier elements which make up our rocky planet, and also our gas giants. So star formation is necessary for a planet to occur also. But it turns out that in the middle of the spiral galaxy, the density of stars is much higher, and of course stars give off considerable amount of radiation, lethal radiation. Astronauts, when they spacewalk or even go out in a spaceship of any kind, are exposed to lethal potentially lethal doses of radiation, so they need a lot of shielding. Well, in the center of a galaxy, the density of stars is such that there's too much radiation for life to occur. But if you get too far out, there's not enough ashes to create stars from old stars. So there's a just right zone within any galaxy for a star like ours to be birthed, and therefore a planet to occur. 5, parent star mass. We touched on this earlier. Big stars burn too erratically, and there's also if it's too small, the luminosity decreases such that there's too narrow a range for that planet to be in proximity to the sun. In other words, give or take, in our system, 0.5 million miles from the Earth, and we would not have a stable water system. We need liquid water for life to occur. You get too close and you get steam, you get too far away, you get ice. There's really a very narrow range where a stable hydrocycle can occur. And a sun too small, that that range is so small that the probability for an Earth-type planet to exist becomes nil. Actually, our Sagan and Shklovsky used this parameter and the distance toward the sun and calculated that in our galaxy there were probability of only 1 or 2 Earth-type planets to exist. Well, given the amount of galaxies in the universe, that's still a lot of planets. But they only use 2 parameters. We're using 19, and this data is 10 years old at least. Given more parameters, I'm sure that the probability is even less. Parent star color. If redder or bluer, there would be insufficient photosynthesis response. Now, actually, I have a little problem with this because it seems to me, as we'll get on in later talks, there is speciation, there is change occurring in any given species. And it would seem to me a change in chlorophyll and other photosensitive pigments, the amount of change necessary to be sensitive to a greener or to red or a bluer wouldn't be that significant. So I'm not sure if I would count this. 7, surface gravity. So this is contingent upon the mass of the planet. If stronger, so for instance in Jupiter-type planets, big planets, the gravity is so strong that you retain too much ammonia and methane, these lighter gases, which have the components of life chemicals, but they themselves are not conducive. Those gases aren't conducive to life. And if weaker, a smaller planet, you start losing water. So there's a zone of mass of a planet necessary, which is, of course, then affects the gravity, which is just right for life. 8, distance from parent star. I guess I covered that. Too far away, it's too cool for a stable water cycle, and if too close, too warm, too hot for a water cycle. Thickness of the crust. So the Earth is basically made up of a molten core and then a mantle, which is kind of a slurry, and then a crust, and then a biosphere. And the crust is actually made of plates, large masses of land, as large as continents. And I'm not sure how many plates there are, on the order of dozens. And they're constantly shifting because of convection currents in the mantle, this molten underneath. And at joints, you have what we call fault zones. For instance, San Andreas, they're in LA. And these are actually 2 plates coming together and butting each other. And then you actually have a subduction zone where underneath in the ocean, the ocean floor, that soil is actually being subducted is the term, down beneath and remelting, and is actually a recirculation of minerals. And then you have volcanic activity all along fault zones usually. Well, if the crust is too thin, the plate tectonic activity is too great. You have continual massive earthquakes, which is not conducive to life. Too much, too thick, and the oxygen transfer to the atmosphere is insufficient. To be honest with you, I don't understand that particular parameter, and the book doesn't really explain it. So if you're interested, call up Hugh. Sorry. 10. Let's go on to the next. Rotation period. So this is how fast the Earth is spinning. You can think of it as like a turkey in a rotisserie. If you go too slow in a planet, if you're spinning too slowly, one side gets very hot and the other side gets very cold, and this is not conducive to life. You spin too quickly, for instance, Jupiter has a 9-hour rotation period. Ours is 24, but because it's so much bigger, it's cooking. And you get these very strong winds, 1,000-mile-per-hour winds on Jupiter. And of course, that's not conducive to life. So there's a zone of rotation which is necessary for life. Gravitational interaction with the moon. Actually, some people call our system a double planet system. Our moon is quite large compared to the Earth, and you could even squeeze in and say it's a second planet. And the tidal interactions between the Earth and the moon are actually stronger than that between the Earth and the sun, and it actually stabilizes the obliquity of the Earth. That's if the sun is here and the planets are out here, there's a plane around which they orbit, and actually Pluto's out of the plane for reasons I won't get into, but it's important that this same plane is maintained, and the moon interaction with our planet helps maintain that. And also maintains our axial tilt, which is 23.5 degrees. And the tilt determines our seasons. If there was no tilt, for instance, life could still exist, but in a much narrower latitude. As it is, life can exist almost up to the poles. But if there was no tilt, the amount of livable space on the Earth would be less. One could still have life, but it would not be as wide a breadth, if you will. The magnetic field, it's called the magnetosphere. It's a magnetic field, spherical, completely surrounding the Earth, and it's very helpful. It stops cosmic rays, which are very bad for life and cause mutations. But if it's too strong, you get enormous electromagnetic storms, which is not conducive to life. It's too weak, then there's not enough filtering of these cosmic rays. So there's a just right amount of this magnetosphere. The axial tilt, I covered that. Albedo, this is the amount of light that is reflected back out from the surface. So light's coming in from the sun. There are certain frequencies, particularly infrared heat, which is retained to an extent by the amount of CO2 and water in the atmosphere, but also the polar ice caps and the composition of the crust. And if there's too much light energy retained, the albedo is too low, you get a tropical situation. And that sounds kind of great, but actually it's not for higher organisms. It's called a runaway greenhouse effect. We're concerned about that now in our time because of the ozone depletion and the increased amount of CO2, which contributes to the amount of heat retained in the albedo because of gasoline burning and so carbon fuel burning. If the albedo is too great, light is reflected away, then you get a runaway ice age. And as I mentioned last time, the last ice age, the mean temperature was only a difference of 5 degrees Fahrenheit. It doesn't take much difference in temperature to create big effects. Oxygen to nitrogen ratio governs the amount of energy spent per unit time. If larger, life functions would proceed too quickly. If smaller, life functions would proceed too slowly. 16, carbon dioxide and water vapors, I kind of mentioned that. Again, the greenhouse effect or the ice age effect. 17, ozone levels. This is a form of oxygen which protects us from ultraviolet light. If greater, the surface temperatures would become too low. If less, the surface temperatures would be too high. 18, the atmospheric electrical discharge, that's lightning. Lightning actually fixes nitrogen in the soil, nitrogen necessary for plants to survive, and therefore animals like us. If greater, you get too much fire destruction. Lightning causes fires, and we'd be constantly engulfed in flames, or nearly so. If too little, there'd be too little nitrogen fixing in the soil. 19, and finally, seismic activity. These are earthquakes. These, as I mentioned earlier, recycle nutrients, minerals, which are necessary for life. But if too much seismic activities, life forms, especially higher life forms, couldn't exist. And if less, then nutrients on the ocean floor, there would not be a recirculation of nutrients. Okay, now I want to look at the probabilities of all these. I'm just going to go through these very quickly and then discuss what's the probability of finding an Earth-type planet. Okay, galaxy type, I talked about two types, so the probability of finding one like ours is 1/2, 0.5. Star location, so that's within their galaxy. And by the way, these numbers are agreed upon by most astronomers. And these numbers were presented in Congress to give them an understanding of what's the probability of finding life when asked to finance SETI, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. And they were turned down. Congress bought these numbers. And as I said, most astronomers agree with these numbers. A number of stars, so binary is out, bachelors are in, so that's 1/2. Star type, we're in the 3rd generation, so approximately 0.3. Star age, they gave it a 1 in 10 chance of the right star age. These are star mass and distance of the stars. These were actually Carl Sagan's numbers, quite small. The inclination of the orbit, so that's that picture I drew of the obliquity. They gave that a fairly hefty 0.8. Axial tilt, 0.3. The rotation period's pretty stringent, 0.1. Eccentricity, so it's if we're looking down on it, this is the sun and this is the Earth. Actually, the Earth doesn't, in fact, all the planets don't orbit in a complete circle. It's somewhat elliptical, kind of stretched out. But if it's too elliptical, you get too great temperature deviation, fluctuation. So there's a just right period there, or just right distance. And they gave that a 0.1. Surface gravity, this is pretty stringent, 1/1000th. Tidal forces, this has to do with the moon. Magnetic field, 0.01. Albedo, 0.1. Density, thickness of the crust, ocean to continent ratio. This is important for higher life forms. Soil mineralization, this is subduction. Atmospheric temperature gradient, atmospheric transpiration. I haven't discussed all of these. Atmospheric pressure, electric discharge. Now these two, to be honest with you, I don't understand, but they cancel each other out anyway, so it really doesn't matter. The one is greater by the same amount that this one's less. So if you, in probabilities, what you do to find a probability of something, you multiply each one together. If you multiply all those numbers up, you come up with, the probability is 10 to the minus 31. The amount of stars, or planets, will be 10 to the 24th. There's 10 to the 23rd stars and 10 planets per, so that's 24. Well, you divide these two, 10 to the minus 34 with 10 to the minus 24, you come up with 1 chance in 10 million, 10 to the 7th. of finding an Earth-type planet. In other words, it's not really rational to even think that our planet came into being by chance, because the chance is 1 in 10 million, which speaks to me of the divine intervention of God, that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. The probability of it coming to existence on its own is not reasonable. 1 in 10 million is not a very good chance. And as I said, when these numbers were debated on the Senate floor, their grant was denied, because it's just not reasonable to think. But I should hasten to add that there are astronomers that disagree for various reasons. And I don't know if you ever, there's a recent movie called Contact. It was out a couple years ago that dealt with this. And that woman that was in the film, she was working on this search, and there are people that still do that, but it is privately funded. All right. The last thing I want to talk about is life on Mars. You may have heard on the news, in the last couple years, meteor material examined, whose composition was known to be that of Martian crust material. We know that from having taken samples from the Martian surface. And what happens is a meteor or something impacts on the Martian surface and wafts material up into the atmosphere beyond its own gravity. So it's floating around there, and some of it gets caught in our gravity and it becomes a meteor of ours, but its origin is Martian. Well, they found some of this stuff, I think it was in Antarctica, and noticed that there under electron microscopy looked like structures would look like life, look like bacteria. And everybody thought, wow, we found life on Mars. Well, the consensus now, after 2 years or so, is that it was an artifact, probably chemical in origin. One of the arguments against it was so small. There's certain limits to how small life can get, and it was a tenth of what the smallest thing we've ever seen that's living. So that was a problem. You know, there's a certain amount of basic information that's necessary to biologists look at life minimum as the ability to reproduce and the ability to metabolize, to take energy and things from the environment and use it for its own. And there's a certain amount of information necessary for that. And there are size constraints on how much information you can pack into a certain given our life molecules. And as I said, there's no evidence for life being anything other than carbon-based. And so that was one argument, but also other arguments. But having said that, the same is true in our planet. We've had meteor impacts. There's one in Arizona, great big one. There's evidence for one in the Caribbean basin, a large one. It's thought that that's what was the demise of the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. It's possible. And so material is wafted up into our atmosphere and lost from our gravity, and more than likely some of it ended up on Mars. It's going to be, and I think given time and energy, sooner or later we will find life on Mars. Now, just to give you an idea of the condition of the Martian surface at this time, 1 drop of water would evaporate in a second right now on the Martian planet. Not very conducive to life. But it appears that in the past, way past, billions of years ago, that there was water and conditions were different on the Martian surface. So right now, all that we could hope for if we found life would probably be seeds or zygotes or spores of some sort, some form of life which can be preserved over time and not deteriorate. For instance, it was found in the Egyptian pyramids, they found wheat seeds. These are, some of them, 4,000 years old, and they grew, given water. The conditions are just right in that area, very dry, for them to be preserved and still maintain life potential. Well, the same could be true potentially on the Martian surface. The problem is, when we find it, how will we know from what origin it is? Well, you can do DNA analysis, which will give you a footprint of all life that is extant now, but what if it had been generated billions of years ago? We don't have any DNA from life billions of years ago, so we won't have anything to compare it with. So it could be problematic. It's estimated that 1,100 species are able to waft material into space in the form of seeds and spores and survive those spores in space. And of them, 148, it's thought, could end up on Mars. Well, this doesn't prove life was generated or originated on Mars, but to me it speaks of the prolific nature of life on Earth, that it's so abundant that it even escapes the atmosphere and wafts over into neighboring planets. So that's the story on Martian life. On to UFOs. The reason I even talk about UFOs is because most of us, if not all of us, have heard about such occurrences. And immediately the question comes to mind, well, if life didn't evolve on Earth, perhaps it was brought here from some other system, from another intelligent race. And who are these? What is this UFO phenomenon? And could that be a source? In fact, I believe it's Watson. I can't even remember, Watson or Crick. I think it's Watson. This is the Watson-Crick famous duo who discovered the DNA helix structure. Believes, and he's not the only one, doesn't believe in that life could have evolved here. It's impossible. But he believes that it was seeded from some other source. A meteor, for instance. In fact, we do find amino acids and such like life compounds on meteors. And so one could infer, well, it was seeded here from some other source. Well, problem is the same issues and physical constraints exist anywhere in the universe. There's no evidence that the physics that we have observed on this planet are any different than anywhere else in the universe. And what I will show you in subsequent lectures is there's a very short time frame for life to have occurred, on the order of 200 million years. And anywhere in the universe, life couldn't have existed in the form that we see it before 10 billion. So there's only a 5 billion year time frame between that time and now, and I submit the same physical constraints would be extant anywhere else in the universe, any other planet. And then there would be the problem of transporting it here. So there's problems in that. Oh, let's go into UFOs. Has anybody seen the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind? It came out, boy, 1979, 78, some.
See parts of it.
Well, it's based on actual true characters. If you recall, there was a French scientist, and an American scientist, and they were supposed to be playing the parts of Alan Hynek and Jacques Vallée, who are real people. Alan Hynek is a physics professor in an American university. He's been studying for 30 years. Probably retired by now, maybe dead for all I know. I'm sorry, Alan, if you're out there. But they took upon themselves the studying of UFOs, and they came up with 3 categories of description: first kind, second kind, and third kind. And that's here on the overhead. The first kind they categorized as a sighting, either a photograph or radar or orally by hearing. And they recorded a minimum of 700,000 sightings over the last several decades. Some say as high as 10 million. Worldwide, since World War II, 10 to 20 million of these have been documented, and probably many more undocumented. So this is a fairly frequent occurrence. The second kind they categorize as physical consequences. That is, burned fields, trees knocked down, and there's 800 of these in the U.S. documented. The third kind are individual claims of personal contact. A minimum of 1,000 cases recorded, others say as high as 50,000. If you take a poll in the U.S., 1 out of 10 adults has seen a UFO. Has anybody seen a UFO in this room? 1. And there's just about 10 people in here, so that stands out. Well, and it turns out that this phenomenon isn't just witnessed by crackpots. Some very famous people have seen, and this is just a smattering of them, an Egyptian pharaoh, Christopher Columbus reported seeing one, Andrew Jackson, a state governor, a couple of astronauts, and even Jimmy Carter, former president. So one can't relegate this to just crackpots and uninformed, unintelligent people. Actually, the most people that have seen it are airline pilots, which is kind of interesting. A man named Millman, who was actually a meteorologist, came up with actually 7 maxims, but I'm going to talk about 10. And this is found in an article in the Journal of Royal Astronomical Society of Canada, volume 69, page 175. And I want to go through these briefly. Number 1, there's no new phenomenon. Ecclesiastes 1:9 says there's no new thing under the sun. This is not a new phenomenon. People from way in the past have heard it. And every nation of the world, not just U.S., has reported these sightings. Number 2, he says, watch your eyes. So he's basically going to deal with what I would call the 95% of these things are explainable by natural phenomena of some sort. But what I'll get into later here in a second is the 5% which cannot be explained. He says, watch your eyes. Seeing is not believing. There are optical illusions out there that trick you. 3, instruments can deceive. There can be ghost images. Photograph of reflection of a window. Cold, misty conditions can put condensation on your film and your camera. The last frame in the camera roll. Malfunction of instruments, radar, etc. 4, hoax. A lot of people like to, as we were discussing earlier, throw a pie pan and throw a nylon string on it, take a photograph of it. Certainly that doesn't explain all, but some. Beware of the printed word, especially in, oh well, we learned this in logic and in argumentation class. What's your source? What's the credibility of it? If you see a UFO in these pulp magazines by the cash register, you need to doubt the credibility of it. In fact, newspapers, what is their aim? To sell newspapers. And I'm not saying that they lie, but they have to turn over newspapers quickly. Yes, there are investigative reporters, but they're not scientists. And it has happened in the past where a newspaper recorded something, found out it was a hoax, and may or may not have retracted it. Or if they did, it's on the last page. Examine the source. 5, records are incomplete. There are many unreported. 6, man makes mysterious machines, such as the stealth bomber. Hugh Ross recounts a story. He was a resident astronomer at a Canadian radio telescope, and out, these telescopes are usually way out in the boonies. They have to be away from city lights, and they were way out there. Well, at one point they were noticing on their screens this object that was moving quite fast and erratic. And they checked all their instruments and couldn't come up with anything. There was nothing in the sky that would, in the planets and so forth, that would explain that. And they thought, oh, hey, isn't there a military base near here? So they call up the military base and say, hey, are you flying anything in this area? And they said, no. But then after they call, it stopped. There are military secrets out there. There are supersonic hovercrafts, things that we don't even know about. Think about the stealth bomber before it was public. How many years they were developing that, and the public had no knowledge of it. What are they doing now with the technology? You don't know. It could be something on that order. 7, nobody knows everything that happens in nature. Phosphorus dust on wings of birds, and it says in Job 38:33, do you know the laws of nature? And when I was in the Navy, the screw, I was on the west coast of California, and as the boat moves to the water, the screw churns up the water, and there's algae in the water, and this mechanical action causes a photochemical reaction to occur such that this particular algae during certain times of the year glows green. It's really cool. This whole wake of the ship is green at night. It's on the beach too, when you're walking on the beach. So, but if you didn't know that, it might be kind of scary. I grew up with that, so it was no big deal to me, but some of these guys from the East Coast and the Midwest, they've never seen that. So, there are weird things that happen in nature. Okay, the next 3 actually Hugh listed, and I'm going to go through them. And then I'm going to talk about the 5%. And so 95% of recorded UFO phenomenon can be explained by some of these things I just mentioned, physical things or so forth. But now I want to deal with the 5% that cannot be explained by any of these previous explanations. 8, there's no artifacts of UFO ever recovered. No proven cases of physical contact, only testimony. Keep in mind, a photograph is not proof of anything. Especially nowadays with digital manipulations, you can create any image you want, and it looks real. So a photograph in and of itself is no proof of anything. There is talk of, perhaps you've heard of it, a hangar in Arizona where supposedly a crash debris from some craft is stored. Well, if you recall back in the 60s in the Nixon Watergate scandal, the top people of the United States couldn't keep a secret for 11 days. it doesn't seem reasonable to think that something of this magnitude could be kept secret from the public for 30-some years, especially in this country with the Freedom of Information Act and so forth. It's not really likely. I think I put this more in the category of Elvis Presley. We saw Elvis, you know. It sells newspapers, it sells things, it sells movies. It behooves the entertainers of the world to keep this myth alive to sell movies. And in fact, this Contact movie sold us that. 9, the theory that life evolves under natural circumstances is absurd. And I'll hopefully bring you to that conclusion, if I haven't already, when I talk about the biology end of things. So again, if life didn't originate here, it would have to have originated elsewhere, but the probability is equally small in any other part of the universe for life to occur. 10, the phenomena that are described seem to be non-physical. And now I'm going to give you, so this 5%, I'm going to give you some evidences for the non-physical nature of the UFOs which cannot be explained. Okay, at the same sighting, a UFO may be seen but not photographed, or photographed but not seen. So any physical object that you can see, there's no physical reason why that image wouldn't impose itself on film. Yet, this has been observed. This speaks of a non-physical nature of these phenomena. At the same sighting, a UFO may be detected, tracked by radar but not seen, or may be seen but not detected by radar. Again, that's physically not possible. Never has a sonic boom resulted from the movement of a UFO, nor is there any evidence of air resistance. So, for instance, when the Challenger comes in, the tiles on it are glowing red. It's hot when it re-enters the atmosphere because of friction. Any physical object moving through air causes friction, and if you go faster than around 700 miles an hour, you experience a sonic boom. And in fact, the Challenger, the space shuttle, several sonic booms. Yet these objects, some of which have been the highest tracked at 18,000 miles per hour, there's no sonic boom. That is not possible physically in any physical object. Some UFOs project light beams at finite length. This is science fiction. You know, like the lightsaber on Star Wars. Light doesn't do that. It continues. It cannot stop at a finite distance. But yet, this has been observed. UFOs frequently are reported to violate laws of physics, making right-angled turns, sudden stops, sudden accelerations, up to speeds of 15,000 miles per hour. Excuse me. Well, if a steel ball traveling at 5,000 miles per hour taking a right turn would shear, it would just fall apart. Physical objects can't make those kind of jerky movements at that speed. UFOs change shape, size, and color at random. Physical objects can't do that. At the same sighting, a UFO may disappear or reappear or disintegrate and come together again. So this is not possible with physical objects. No electromagnetic communication or control signals from UFOs have ever been intercepted. So radio signals. In other words, and they seem to fly in formation. It would seem that there would be some sort of communication, and certainly any intergalactic travel would be aware of the electromagnetic spectrum and take use of some part of it. We use radio, maybe they would use some other frequency, but we don't detect anything like that. and we have the instruments to detect it. There's no physical uniformity to UFOs. So if there was intergalactic space travel possible, it'd be logical to think that the shape and the parameters of that kind of travel would dictate a certain model or a shape. You know, cars have wheels because there's certain things necessary for an object to move across land, and so all cars have four wheels or two wheels. They have wheels. In other words, there's a overarching design. Yet we don't see any consistency in these UFOs. Boy, that's right in the light. Never has any UFO artifact or crash debris been recovered. No high-resolution photograph images of UFOs have ever been obtained, and at the same sighting, the resolution of UFOs image may change. Well, physical objects, any physical object, you should be able to see it clearly. Yet all the photographs you ever see of these things are out of focus. That's not possible. Light, when it impinges on an object, will come to your retina at a finite distance. This is not indicative of a physical object. UFO-related electromagnetic phenomena are out of all proportion with electromagnetic forces verified. In other words, for the things that occur that we see, for instance, burning, trees being knocked over, that kind of phenomenon, would take magnetic forces on the order of 10,000 gauss. That's the unit of magnitude of magnetic force, and the Earth magnetic field's on the order of 1, and we don't. In other words, we're not detecting with instruments that detect magnetic magnitudes. The phenomena observed don't match the amount of magnetism. In other words, we're just seeing background. With the instruments, we're seeing on the order of 1 gauss, and yet to create any of these kind of physical phenomena that have occurred, you would have it on the order of 10,000 gauss to create that kind of disturbance. Yet we don't see that, so there's not a matchup. Well, the conclusion, two researchers from Spiritual Counterfeit Project reported, quote, "Entities that operate with total disregard to the inviolate laws of physics, tracking at the speed of light or faster, having solved all their problems, would have to be classified as non-physical, that is, spiritual, not physical, semantic arguments notwithstanding." So real things are occurring. Damage, so third kind encounters, people killed, bruised, raped, buildings being destroyed. This is not imagination. This is not on the categories Millman described earlier. So these are not natural explanations or phenomenon. And this same conclusion is reached by every respectable investigator, including Jacques Vallée and Alan Hynek. In other words, phenomena are real but not physical. They stop here. NASA response, quote, from Bernard Oliver, "Any visitation or communication would have to come from beings who had to learn to travel at least at the speed of light and probably much faster, perhaps to the point of being able to arrive at the destination by the time they had completed the thought process of deciding to go." The problem with operating at things faster than the speed of light, which would be necessary. The nearest star, Alpha Centauri, is 4 light years away, and that would take 80,000 years in our present technology to get there one way. But Alpha Centauri is a binary system, so that wouldn't work. So at least 100 light years to the next possible source. In order to operate faster than the speed of light, our physics wouldn't work. Our physics that we observe and have manipulated to produce what we see, what we call technology, says that nothing can go faster than the speed of light. If it did, then our physics wouldn't make sense. Yet, these things would seem to have to violate the laws of physics. Well, Jacques Vallée and John Keel looked at this in more depth. Keel quotes, well, let me back up. The Urantia book is a book that's authored supposedly by 23 extraterrestrials. And the contents, a third of it discusses the deity of Jesus Christ. And yet the message seems to be benign and peaceful. Why would another being from other solar systems talk about Jesus Christ so much? Jesus Christ is the author of one religion, but there are others. Why focus so much on that? Well, it turns out that if you look at the phenomenon, these third type encounters, what people have noticed is that this phenomenon is very similar, if not identical, to occult phenomenon. When people dabble with Satan worship, with any type of seance, demonology, any of that type of thing, the same sort of phenomenon occur. Quote from John Keel, "Demonology is not another crackpotology. It is the ancient and scholarly study of monsters, demons, who have seemingly coexisted with man throughout history. Thousands of books have been authored on the subject, many written by scholars, scientists, and clergy. An uncounted number of well-documented demonic events are readily available to any researcher. The manifestations and occurrences described in this imposing literature are similar, if not entirely identical, to the UFO phenomenon," unquote. So what I would submit these phenomena are demonic encounters. The Bible talks about evil increasing at the end times. I don't have time. I'm running out of time here, but 2 Thessalonians 2, 9 through 12 discuss how things like this can occur. And since World War II, we've escalated in the number of sightings by several-fold, over 20-fold. And though it seems to be leveling off now. The Bible describes an end-time events, an end-time of the earth, of history of mankind. And I believe we're in that, and this is one phenomenon that supports that, the increase of these sorts of demonic interactions. If you're in doubt of these things, I would challenge you to go to a church that worships Satan and observe the evil there. That's more than what people who are thinking evil thoughts or doing evil things could cook up on their own. There's something supernatural about it, and it's not good. It's not something humans can do on their own. In 1948, Israel became a nation. This was predicted as one of the things that would occur in the end times. So I think I'll leave it at that, and next time we'll talk about Scripture and how that relates to creationism. Thank you very much. Good evening.